Thank you very much, Colette. It's extraordinary to be standing in front of so many people. For me as a Tipperary person, this is going to become an incredibly rare thing for people from Tipperary to be addressing such a large gathering on the Hogan stand. We have one sort of real track record in Tipperary, and that's stopping teams winning 5 in a row. That's even gone now, so we can stop Limerick. I'm delighted to be here today. I think it's wonderful to see so many people working in this sector. I've been given the task of talking about learning from the past. I think primarily because it's NESC's 50th birthday was last year, and we spent quite a bit of time trying to look back at the past and what we'd done. To be honest, in doing that, we kind of found ourselves thinking, well, it's good to look back, but we also need to look forward. So I'll maybe break a little bit from this strict ask and talk a little bit about that. I'm just going to talk about a couple of things, just really NESC in brief and just talking very briefly about what we do. Then I will look back at what I think are some of the big moments over the last 50 years, I suppose, at NESC, but even more recently. Then I just want to talk a little bit about what I see as the role of the C&V sector and why I think NESC needs the sector. And then, as I say, I'll finish with just a little bit looking forward in terms of what I see as some of the key questions. This is going to sound like I'm sort of not doing my job at the moment because I've been on a little bit of a circuit. Yesterday I was in Galway where myself and Ivan were speaking at an event about public policy. A few days before that, I was at Child Poverty Summit, where we had a really excellent discussion about the question of child poverty and child well-being. And later, towards the end of next week, I'm going down to the Burren to a workshop. And it's really interesting, the connection in that. In all of those events, and particularly yesterday, it was really clear, and Ivan made the case, that what we're really seeing in public policy is a real increasing dependency on trying to find out the connections that other people have with issues and trying to feed that back into the policy system. I think it was really evident at the Child Poverty Summit where we got, I think there was 17 round tables where people summarised and discussed the issues and put them forward into a kind of a central discussion towards the end. The same yesterday, as I say, at the Galway Summit. And really interesting for me, the one I'm going to in the Burren turns out to be a conference or a workshop with a person who some of you may be aware of, a person called Dr. Dan Siegel. And Dan Siegel's, it's really interesting, well, for me, because I've just come across it, his core concept is the wheel of awareness. And it's, in one sense, as I say, others will know more about it, but I thought it's really interesting. What he's trying to do is to figure out this concept, what he's calling intra-connections. So the connections that we all have with each other and sort of trying to move from the I to the we. And it's very, very interesting. And I think it is right at the heart of public policy at the moment is how do we make sure that that sort of sense of the we is more reflected more centrally in public policy. And I'll talk about this a little bit, but the issue is trying to go beyond some sense of consultation as a tick box to real deep engagement and careful listening. So if I'll just talk very briefly then about NESC. I mean, NESC is a multi-stakeholder advisory group. So we sit on a council with the community and voluntary sector is a core part of that. At the moment, we have 3 members representing the sector, Father Sean Healy, Breed O'Brien and Nat O'Connor, who I'm sure most of you will be familiar with. We also have the employers, trade unions, environmental groups, farmers, with key government departments. We have 8 independent members. And the core work that we try to do in NESC then is to provide strategic advice on if you like, big policy with a P, trying to figure out what is the kind of medium-term issues, where is the country going, what is the future direction of travel, how we address issues that have what we would call knotty issues that are not getting resolved. And what we're always trying to do is bring what we think is a unique institutional perspective, which is to try to look at the issue from the bottom and connect that back up to the top. So we're always trying to look at a particular issue and say, well, when we hear from people who are actually doing this in practice, where are they getting blocked? Where we hear from people who are being very successful or innovative, why are they not able to scale it? So, for example, pilots, and we're great at doing pilots in Ireland. The bugbear for us is, well, why can't we mainstream? Why can't we scale it? So that's what we're trying to do is to fish that information up. So we try to write in the end a report which is in the name of that group of 30 people. And all of them, when they come to the table, have ambition. They all want to make Ireland a better place. But they're all also very acutely aware of the constraints in which they have to work. So within the sector, we'll hear about the particular issues, but we'll also hear from the Department of Finance, Department of Public Expenditure, what they see as constraints. So our job is to try to balance that and to bring some sense of a persuasive argument that tries to reflect where the different parties sit on a particular issue. So NESC has a long history, as I say, about 50 years or so, and I think some aspects haven't changed. There's a really strong commitment to NESC. From the start, I think, there was a very deep commitment to careful listening and to providing a safe space where people could have different views in what they did. And it was, I suppose I would think there has been some change. I mean, particularly maybe some of the issues. NESC only got involved in the climate environmental area in the last 7 or 8 years. Probably 2012 when we formally took on some responsibility in the area. But I think where the biggest change has been in that a lot of the organisations we're now dealing with have a lot of their own research capacity and their own evidence base. So we're less now trying to go out and provide the evidence. We obviously do that. That's part of what we do, the rigorous evidence. But now a lot of more what we do is we're going out through working groups or bilateral meetings to, if you like, test and discuss the evidence and the different views on that particular evidence, and then bring that back into the policy. So I think we are more participative, more consultative than we would have been when we started, and I think we need to become more so, but I'll maybe mention that at the end. So the key for me is, and continues to be, how we engage with members. So it's a real privilege and honour for me to come today and talk to you about how we do our work, because in the end, I think that our ability to add any value to the policy system depends on trying to find more and better ways to engage with the particular issues that you're dealing with. So I'll just say briefly a little bit about, what I would see as some of the key moments, because I was asked to look at the past. So it's a leave and start question. What was asked in the question, you got to do some bit of that or you won't get good marks. So looking at the past, I think if you look at the early years in NESC and some of the work, some of their work around the views of the economy, the nature of FDI, the Telesis report in 1982, all its work in the early days in rural development were very, very influential. If you look at more recent decades, I think in the 2000s, and we still have people talking to us about the developmental welfare state in 2005 as being a really influential document. Its key contribution was to say, well, we need to have universal supports for people, but alongside that, we also needed to have targeted, tailored supports for individuals. I think that remains even more true today than it did in 2005. The need to have a universal and targeted supports for those who are in greatest needs. We also did very interesting work in the early 2000s about housing and how we needed to build sustainable communities, sustainable neighbourhoods. If I had one wish, it would have been that report would have been taken much more seriously in 2005. But in any case, it wasn't. We also did a lot of work in 2000s on well-being. Again, it was really, really groundbreaking in 2000s. It's taken a long time for that to land in the policy system, and we did some more recently, but we did do work on well-being in the early 2000s. In 2010, we did a lot of work on the 5-part crisis, and maybe in one sense the least said about that at this stage, the better, but we were really trying to argue that it was not just a fiscal crisis, that it was also a social crisis, and as well as other things. And I think that was a really important message to government at that point, to take a very holistic approach to the crisis. And we also did a lot of work in 2000s again on housing, and we really focused in on social housing and the 3 different pillars in terms of social housing supply, and really trying to argue that all 3 channels, the AHBs, local authorities and private rental, had problems and challenges, and all 3 needed to be addressed. As I say, in the more recent times, I suppose we've done a lot of work on well-being, we've done a lot of work on shared island, we've done a lot of work on social enterprise, biodiversity, climate change. We've done a lot of work on just transition in agriculture, and we're currently doing some very interesting work around the idea of better work. So in all of those work, I think, as I said, there's been a lot of engagement. So for me, when I think about that work and think about the work we're doing now, if I ask myself, why does NESC actually need the C&V sector? And I think, for me, our credibility or our leadership, such as it is, and our ability to shape policy, is built on having dynamic feedback loops with the sector and the other sectors. And I think the working assumption that we start on most policy issues that we're asked to look at is that we do not know the answer. So we start with that position. So if you really believe that you don't know the answer, then you say, well, okay, we'll look at the literature, obviously, but the real issue is go out and talk to people who are more closely involved, who are working on a particular thing every day. So for me, consultation and engagement is not an add-on. It's the start, the middle, and the end of how you do good advice and policy. So I give you very briefly, two examples. So the housing work we did on cost rental, I mean, what we did there was we examined the idea that we had a very singular focus on a profit-driven sector in Ireland. So we went and we looked at other countries, and we looked at this idea of not for or limited profit approaches to housing. We looked at Kemeny work, we looked at international work in Vienna. But then we came back and we said, well, we have people in the AHBs and we have people working in the sector who know a lot about this. So we spent a lot of time in dialogue with people who had lots of expertise, including our chair, Colette, who was really had fantastic knowledge in this area. And we looked at a lot of the very detailed issues. We looked at legal issues, we looked at funding issues around it. And then we came back and we argued from about 2014-15 that we needed to develop a cost rental sector in Ireland. It's a little bit frustrating that it's 2024, and yes, the idea is now taking hold, but 10 years ago we were arguing for it. But I think it came from that engagement with the sector. The second area is just to mention is just transition in agriculture. Again, it's a hugely potentially contentious area, how we're going to transition within the agriculture sector. Our approach to this was to create a process over about 18 months where we engaged, and again we had people from the sector. Michelle Murphy was on the panel, on the working group, and we engaged and we went to farm visits and worked with the sector to come up with what we thought was a roadmap forward on this particular area. So they're just two of the examples of work that in terms of how we used it, our engagement. So going forward, so conscious of the time, I mean, for us in NESC at the moment, we've come out of a period, we said our anniversary, and we think that Ireland really is at another pivotal moment in its history. I mean, the conference that we worked on surfaced huge tensions that you will all be aware of in terms of the uncertainty and the forces for change that we are now experiencing around climate change, biodiversity loss, geopolitical tension, generative AI, synthetic biology, misinformation that I know you're going to hear about later, breakdown in trust with institutions. These are big, big issues that are bearing on all of us in our society. So against that, I think it's very interesting that when you look at some of our aggregate measures around well-being framework, it's quite a rosy picture. So we take that rosy picture, but then go and meet people. Going back to my point of engagement, meet people who are working in real projects and talk to them. That rosy picture and their experience are not matching up. So the disconnect between the high level, if you like, aggregates, what people's lived experience, combined with this sense that there are enormous pressures for change, mean to me that we are at a pivotal moment. So the question is, what do we need to do? And I think there are two things. I think vision is really, really important now for us as a society. I think we need a positive vision and the idea of hope really features strongly in the NESC work over the last year, that we need something to give people hope. What would that vision be? What would the sense of something that they could belong to, and what would it be? And people could have very diverse opinions about what is the future or the idea to which we all wish to belong to. But we need to figure that out. We can see the tensions that are beginning to emerge. So I think that we really do need further work on vision and shared values. But I also think that we need to really grapple with and navigate really tough questions. And I have a number of them, but there would be others. I'm sure there are others, and I'd be really interested in your views. But I think there are five. I think there's a big, big question around how we're going to maintain economic and social well-being while living within planetary boundaries. It's a huge question. I don't think any country knows the answer to it. And no developed country is living within planetary boundaries, so it's not just us. The second one is, how will the advances in AI and synthetic biology shape our economic, environmental and social choices? The third one might sound a bit academic, but I think it's really important. How can more tailored, early and proactive investment in people-centred services shape well-being, deepen equality and foster inclusion. I think it's a huge question. How we create public systems that allow people like yourselves who are delivering services to have more autonomy to respond to the challenges that are arising for you. I think our public service system is moving in that direction and trying to grapple with that, but it is difficult. The fourth area is around demographic change and changing life expectancy and well-being through the life course. I think we are only beginning to understand the profound implications of that and of where we're going in terms of the demographic profile in Ireland. And I do think it feeds into the issue around migration and our need for migration, inward migration. And the third area is around Ireland's relationship and role within the EU and I think within the UK and the shared island perspective. I think that the role of the EU is changing very, very significantly. It's becoming more inclined to act on particular issues. We need to think about how that's going to affect our institutions and how we'll respond. So, closing points. I think we need to grapple with these bigger questions. I think we need to find where are we going to get these answers. I think we might be tempted to think there are tools out there, things like foresight. I think they're really important, and I'm sure Derek may touch on them. I think foresight exercises are really useful, but I also think we need to remember the idea that we don't know the answers and that they're likely to be found by engaging with people who are working on the issues. I think the second thing is we in NESC need help with the current work we're doing. We're doing a lot of work around energy poverty, and we're doing a lot of work on housing, compact growth. These are things that we will continue over the next 3 to 4 months, look to get more help from yourselves. I think the final thing I would say is just to pick up on what Ivan was mentioning. I think we in NESC and the government in general need to deepen our capacity to hear what's happening. I think we need to figure out how we're going to engage with people who are the most marginalised. I think we need to figure out how we're going to engage with younger people in a real way, such that when their ideas are articulated, they're acted upon. So I think this isn't going to be easy, how we develop that template of how we're going to engage more deeply. And that's the connection I think that Ivan is raising about the Health Partnership Forum. I think it's a really, really interesting innovation in a sense in one sector. And Ivan was making the point yesterday at the Public Policy Forum, it has potential in lots of other sectors. And I think his argument is correct that if it has potential, it will only be if there's investment to develop the capacity for the sector to engage in that type of process. So I leave it at that. I think they're my closing. Thank you.